Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome Laila Mickelwait to the Union today. Laila is the co-founder and CEO of the Justice Defence Fund and the founder of the Traffickinghub movement supported by millions online. Laila? Thank you. Gosh, I just pause very quickly. Thank you so much for joining us again today. I think it's probably a good place to start with, how did you come to make the discovery that you did about Pornhub? And I think it's probably wise to say, if anyone would like to take a step out of the room, the members' room is free, and there are some welfare officers there, just due to the nature of the content today.
Yeah, I don't want to hold back. So definitely a trigger warning for kind of what could be explicit or triggering content. But the way that I made this discovery that what I like to say Pornhub was not a porn site, but was a crime scene, was in the context of, at the time, about 15 years in the fight, in the uphill battle against the injustice of sex trafficking. And I had been paying attention to the headlines. I was noticing that there was a trend, a natural trend, of sex trafficking not only happening offline, but being filmed and uploaded online. As we live in a digital world, there was this intersection between sex trafficking and the porn industry. And so I was paying attention to the headlines naturally. And it was at this moment in my life where I was pretty discouraged at the time. I had been fighting this fight for a long time. I didn't feel like we were making very much progress, as much as all of our allies and organizations were doing their best to try to combat the injustice. It seemed to just be getting worse. It seemed to be an impossible task to hold abusers accountable at scale and to help kind of push back the tide of injustice that was happening. But I really, could never bring myself to quit. It was, at the time, the only thing that was kind of keeping me sane. I had just had my second baby, and he was a very sad baby because he was in pain. He had a shoulder dystocia when he was born. I don't know if anybody knows what that is, but basically he was such a big baby. He was 10 pounds, 11 ounces, and his shoulders got stuck. And so it was a very painful process for both of us. And he was up late just screaming and screaming. And so it was just a very difficult time in my life, but I was up late one night consoling him in the darkness of my bedroom, and I was thinking about a story that I had just read in the news. It was a few days after he was born that I had read this story, and it was about a 15-year-old girl from Florida who had been missing for an entire year, and she was finally found when her distraught mother was tipped off by a Pornhub user that he recognized her daughter on the site, and she was found in 58 videos being raped for profit. At the same time, around that same time, there was another story in the London Sunday Times. They did an investigation and they found dozens of illegal videos on Pornhub within minutes, even children as young as 3 years old. And so as I was, consoling my own baby in the darkness of my bedroom that night, I just had a haunting question. And that was, how in the world did this end up on the world's largest and most popular porn site? And at the time, just to give kind of context for what Pornhub was at the time, this was the beginning of 2020. And, at the time, Pornhub was one of the most popular websites in the world. In fact, by the end of 2020, at the height of COVID, Pornhub had become the 5th most visited website across the entire internet. So not just, porn site, but actual website. They had 170 million visits a day, 62 billion visits per year, and enough content uploaded every year. It would take 169 years to watch if you put those videos back to back. They had done an amazing job over the years of making themselves a household brand name for porn, kind of this cheeky, kind of wink, wink. People were joking about them on Saturday Night Live, and they had pop-up shops for New York Fashion Week. And they were just, people would wear their apparel proudly in public. And so, that was the question, is like, how did this happen? And a phrase that my dad was a very wise man, and he always used to say, assumption is the mother of all screw-ups. And people, including myself and many others, were assuming that all the content that was being uploaded to Pornhub was vetted somehow, that it was, maybe it looked illegal, but it was legal and consensual, as they often said. And so I had an idea. An idea just came to mind, and I said, I'm gonna test the upload system for myself to see what it takes to upload to Pornhub. So I got my baby back to bed, and no, I didn't film a porn film and upload it to Pornhub. I actually just took a video of the rug in the room and the computer keyboard, uploaded it, and found out what millions of people already knew. And that was that all it took to upload to Pornhub was an email address. That in under 10 minutes, anybody in the entire world could upload a sex video to Pornhub without checking whether it was a child, without checking ID to make sure that this is not a child, without verifying consent to make sure that that wasn't a rape or trafficking victim. And because of that, I quickly realized that the site was infested with videos of real sexual crime. And I, this was the discovery. This was when I just couldn't believe that this was the case and felt like I needed to sound the alarm on what was going on, because clearly, there was a lot of criminal content being uploaded to Pornhub. That's how I discovered that this was happening.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think I'm led to ask the next question, which is what constitutes to an act of trafficking? How does uploading a video without consent constitute to an act of trafficking?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so that kind of goes back to the story, because in a burst of inspiration, as I was doing the only thing I could do at the time, I had a couple thousand followers on Twitter, and that was when it was Twitter. And I just, felt like I just can't keep this to myself. Everybody has to know what's going on. And so in a burst of inspiration, I started the hashtag Traffickinghub. And the reason for that is because per definition, so by domestic definition in the US and by international definition, if you have a commercial sex act, so any commercial sex act that is involving a child, or any commercial sex act that is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, that is non-consensual, that constitutes an act of trafficking. And that is why today victims in the US are using our trafficking statutes to sue Pornhub, to actually go after them in a criminal sense as well. It's a violation both of civil and criminal law in our trafficking laws. And so that is why every child or every non-consenting adult that would be on Pornhub was a victim of sex trafficking per definition. And the reason why this is monetized, so you probably were wondering, well, it's free porn, right? These are free porn sites. These are the YouTubes of porn where, this is, anybody can upload and anybody can consume for free. However, it's not free, right? Free porn is not free. It is heavily monetized. So they were actually selling 4.6 billion ad impressions on Pornhub every single day. And that is how they were making hundreds of millions of dollars a year on free porn. So all of these videos are heavily monetized. They're commercialized. And the ones that are benefiting from it are the owners, the executives of Pornhub and its parent company. And that is how they were making the money on all of this free porn and why it constitutes trafficking.
Mm. I mean, yeah, it's shocking. Every single time I hear you speak about this, it never fails to shock me. I think the one thing that I find specifically most shocking is how the parent company have got away with what they have and how they have just transitioned into different names, not different people running the company, just different names essentially, and got away with what they have. And you're in a position, of course, to be taking that down and making everyone aware of what's going on. But would you be able to talk about how the company has literally just gone from one name to now I believe it's ALO, which is where they're currently settled at, and it's been 3 or 4 different name changes, I think.
Of course, yeah. And I can also explain, what is the business model and what is this company and its parent company, and then we can talk about its evolution. So just to give you an idea, Pornhub's not alone. Pornhub is owned by a parent company that used to be called MindGeek. Now MindGeek used to be called ManWin, and before ManWin it was called Mansef. So, it was actually birthed out of Montreal. There was some young entrepreneurs that started a porn business, and they got in trouble with the law. They had millions of dollars seized by the U.S. Secret Service, a suspected money laundering scheme. and they had to then quickly sell the company. They had grown it to a certain size, and they had to quickly sell the company because they were in trouble with the law. So they sold it to a German entrepreneur named Fabian Tillman. And Fabian got a $362 million loan from a hedge fund called Colbeck Capital. And they essentially rolled up the most popular mainstream porn companies under one umbrella that earned basically a virtual monopoly on mainstream popular porn, from subscription sites to pay sites to the tube sites. So they owned everything from Playboy, managed Playboy's sites, to Reality Kings, which would have 44 independent websites, to browsers and Wicked Pictures, and then the pay site, all the rest of the subscription sites, and then the tube sites. So it would be Pornhub and its sister sites. That would be Pornhub, RedTube, YouPorn, ExtremeTube, GayTube, on and on. And so this was the company that kind of Fabian had this vision to mainstream the free porn tube sites, specifically make Pornhub this kind of household brand name, and he did exactly that. However, he got in trouble with the law as well. So he was arrested for tax evasion, and then suddenly he had to sell the company. So then he sold it to two of his executives and a secret majority shareholder, which nobody knew who he was. For many, many years, he had hidden his identity from the public until he was finally exposed in the midst of what happened with the Traffickinghub movement. And he renamed it again. So then they went from Manwin, they rebranded to Mansef to Manwin, and then they rebranded again to MindGeek. And each time it kind of is just a new iteration using the same executives, the same business model, and then you see that happen again. So now, again, in trouble with the law, lots of issues happening where they're being exposed for all of this in the lawsuits, and then they've sold again, and now they've renamed the company to ILO. But I would say, it was sold as a distressed asset. Like at the height of 2020, it was not so. Like they were, kind of at the height of what would be their porn empire. And what's happened since then has caused a lot of trouble for them. And they've had to kind of upend the way that they were doing business. And they faced some serious repercussions, which, we can talk about what actually transpired in the last 5 years since they had now rebranded to another company. There was a private equity firm that formed itself to purchase Pornhub and try to rebrand the company. And they named themselves Ethical Capital Partners in an attempt to kind of whitewash what was going on in their reputation, their toxic reputation as peddlers of crime. And that's kind of what's going on now, is they're trying to kind of rebrand and whitewash what was going on.
You mentioned the name Fabian Tillman there, and I want to focus on that because in your book you say he becomes your biggest informant. How did that come about, and how do you still have like a working relationship there with him now as an informant?
Yeah, that was a surprising part of the story. So I guess I'll go back to what happened next in the story. So Traffickinghub, started to catch on. People were really shocked and horrified as to what was happening on Pornhub, and started a petition that started to go viral. Today we have 2.3 million signatures from every country in the world on a petition to shut down Pornhub and hold its executives accountable for the mass distribution of sexual crime, including child abuse, rape, and trafficking. And as that was going viral, victims and survivors were starting to see it and then reaching out on almost a daily basis at some points. Insiders from the company, whistleblowers from inside the company were reaching out and helping to inform about the inner workings of how the company operated. And one of the people that came forward, shockingly, during all of this was the former owner of Pornhub, who was known as the Zuckerberg of porn in the media. And he was who I told you about that got that $362 million loan. And he reached out saying he wanted to help. And of course, I had my suspicions as to what the motivations were, and I kind of found out later what those actually were. But he actually did provide some really important information. And I told you that there was a secret majority shareholder of the company that nobody knew existed. And he had purposely hidden his identity for many, many years. And Fabian actually shared for the first time who he sold the company to, so the name of the secret majority shareholder. The other thing that he really did help with was this idea of follow the money. That he made it clear that the only thing that could help rein in what was going on and the injustice that was going on was to go after the money, was to go after the credit card companies specifically. He said, if you want to hold Pornhub accountable, you have to go after the credit card companies because that's the only thing that they care about. And we had an idea that that would be kind of the strategy, but that certainly confirmed it, hearing it from the former owner himself. And that's exactly what we did. We really made a huge effort to get the credit card companies, who we call the enablers of the injustice. A judge in California, because Visa itself was being sued by dozens of survivors, and he said in one of his opinions, when he did not allow Visa to dismiss itself from the case. So they filed a motion to dismiss the case. And the judge said that Visa gave Pornhub the very tool through which to complete the crime of knowingly benefiting from child trafficking. And those were the words of Judge Cormac Carney. And so in that sense, like, they were very much an enabler of what was going on. And they had a lot of control over what the company would or wouldn't do. And so we understood that was an important place to put effort, was the credit card companies.
Just before we talk about the credit card companies, I wanted to go back to the business structure, because another thing that I found really shocking is the amount of mediators, or I should say the lack of mediators they have within Pornhub, and the amount of individuals that are actually reviewing content uploaded. So one of the things they pledged themselves on is having every single piece of content reviewed or monitored, but you can tell us about how that process actually works. And
yeah, of course, I'd be happy to share that. Some of the details that came forward through the past 5 years have been horrifying and shocking, and in direct contradiction to the public statements of the company. And I think before I share that, I want to share a couple of stories of some survivors and victims, because then the information that I share afterwards about the way the company worked will make a lot more sense. And I think that it will actually have a bigger impact on all of our hearts and minds to hear a few stories. So I told you about the 15-year-old girl from Florida. Another story I'd like to share is about Serena Fleitas, who was a 13-year-old from Bakersfield, California. She was a innocent young teen. She had never even kissed a boy before. She was a straight-A student, and she had a crush on a boy a year older than her. And he convinced her to share some nude images and videos of herself, which she did. This is very common. No victim blaming whatsoever here. In fact, I just read a statistic the other day from Thorn, which is a very well-known and reputable child protection organization in the United States, and they did a survey of over 1,000 children, and they found that 1 in 7 9 to 12-year-olds had said that they had shared nude images and videos of themselves. Very common. So she did that, and then he actually ended up sharing it with classmates, and it ended up getting uploaded to Pornhub, where it got millions and millions of views. It was downloaded, and then it was re-uploaded, and she would beg for that to come down from the site, and she would be ignored. And if they did respond to her, she testified before Canadian Parliament. This is in her, legal complaint as well, that, she would be hassled by the company, where they would tell her that she had to prove that she was a victim, that she had to prove that she was underage in the video. Now, remember that she didn't have to prove that she was of age or consenting to have the video uploaded, right? And even if she did get it down, it would just get uploaded again and again. And all of this sent her on a spiral of despair and trauma. She ended up dropping out of school. She was being bullied. She got addicted to drugs to try to numb the pain. She ended up trying to kill herself multiple times. And this is actually common for victims of image-based sexual abuse. Surveys are showing that it's upwards of 50% of victims of the non-consensual distribution of intimate images that have suicidal ideation. And then she wound up homeless, living out of a car. Thankfully, today Serena's taking that power back. I mean, she is suing Pornhub, not only Pornhub, but its individual owners, the hedge funds, Visa, and she's doing very well in her pursuit of justice. But that's another example. That I'll give two more examples. So there was a 12-year-old boy from Alabama, and he was drugged, and he was overpowered, and he was raped by a man named Rocky Shea Franklin. And Franklin filmed that abuse, and he uploaded 23 of those videos to Pornhub with titles that blatantly indicated that this was abuse, titles and tags. Things like Uncle Secret, things like young ass is best, things that would clearly indicate this is a child in the videos. He was actually monetizing them, so 20% of the videos that are uploaded to Pornhub were part of like a model hub program, they called it, where they could actually do pay to download. So he was in a profit-sharing relationship with Pornhub, where they were splitting the profit from the sale of this child's abuse. Police found out about this, they apprehended him, and he was sentenced to 40 years in prison for what he did. But when the police reached out to Pornhub, they were ignored multiple times. Pornhub reached out to the police, and for 7 months, they were ignored. Pornhub ignored the police demands to take down the videos. They stayed up getting hundreds of thousands of views, and today that boy is suing Pornhub in Alabama for what happened. Last example I'll give is Nicole Adamando from New York. So it's not just children who ended up on Pornhub. Adults were being exploited in these videos as well. And one horrific case that really, just was so tragic to me was a woman from New York named Nicole Adamando, and she was the mother of 2 young children, and she was being abused. Her partner was torturing her, raping her, filming that, and uploading it to Pornhub. She ended up killing him in self-defense, but she got sentenced to life in prison, separated from her 2 young children. Thankfully, she had a really good legal team, and that sentence was reduced down to 7 years, and she's out today. But those are some examples of the kinds of victims that ended up on Pornhub. And to go back to the business model, well, how did this happen? Yeah, I mean, they weren't verifying agent consent. So number one, that's one of the reasons why this was happening. But another reason is because the business model of free user-generated porn relies on frictionless uploading, because it relies on massive amounts of content to stay on the site, to generate Google search results, to generate massive amounts of traffic to come to the site so that they can sell billions of ad impressions every day and make that money. So they don't want to remove content from the site. It actually goes against the very business model of how they make money. And how that played out in a practical sense with the way they ran the business is that we found out that they only had 30 moderators moderating content on Pornhub. Compare that to Facebook's 15,000 moderators, and they still don't have enough. But these people were working in Cyprus. They were working 10 at a time on 8-hour shifts, and they were tasked with viewing 700 to up to 2,000 videos per 8-hour shift, just clicking through those videos as fast as they could with the sound off. They were reprimanded if they viewed less than 700 videos per shift. And that is how so much of this content was completely being missed. But even if they were viewing every video, it was a guessing game. So they called it, they were just guessing. It was a game of Russian roulette with people's lives. Like, who's 16 and who's 18? What's rough sex and what's rape? Nobody can actually tell the difference on a consistent basis. And so these moderators were literally just guessing. And often they were guessing wrong. Another example is that we understood and we found out through legal discovery that they only hired one person out of 1,800 employees. Now, this is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. They had 1,800 employees. They hired one person 5 days a week to be reviewing videos flagged by users as terms of service violations, including rape and trafficking. And they had a policy set up where they had to have 15 flags or more before a video would even be reviewed. So a victim like Serena or a victim like that 12-year-old boy could have their abuse on Pornhub, and they could flag it again and again and again and again. They would have to flag it over 15 times for it to even be put in queue for review, and they had a backlog of over 706,000 flagged videos. And that is how they were running the business. And so what I say is that these are not accidents, right? These are intentional policy decisions. We have the CEO and the VPs on the record in emails talking about these policies. The CEO said regarding that flag policy that it was good and reasonable. And so that is how we know, like, the business, the policies, all of it was what I call set up for exploitation to flourish on the site.
And even when that exploitation had been identified, you mentioned in your book this black box issue where they would still mark that content had come down to track how many views and how many kind of
is
how much engagement it
inventory.
had.
Yeah,
Yes.
so that just goes to the free user-generated porn business model of just needing unrestricted amounts of content to live on that site. They didn't really care what was in the content, whether it was 1 minute or 2 minutes or 10 minutes or whether it was professional or not, or whether it was stolen and pirated content from professional porn performers that was then uploaded, or whether it was actual exploitation and non-consensual. And an example of this is the fact that, there was a horrific incident of a prepubescent, clearly prepubescent child that was being tortured and raped on Pornhub with tags indicating that it was torture, that it was rape of a child. And we reported that. It didn't come down. Weeks went by. We finally got in touch with the FBI. The FBI got in touch with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, who finally demanded that video come down. And when the video did come down, they actually took the rape of the child off the site. But they left a black box that said, removed at the request of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And they left the title, and they left the comments, and the view count, and all of that data live on the site so that people could still, because that's the inventory that they need, right? To drive search results in Google, to drive customers and traffic to the site. And when they would come to the site, they wouldn't see that particular child's abuse, but they would see the ads, right, all around that black box, and then they would be directed by the algorithm to similar content, right, that they would be looking for. And so that happened, many, many, many times where they would actually do that, where they would take down a video but leave the content, because content is king. That is what the employees shared. Content is king for the free porn tube sites, and that is how all of that worked.
I want to move on and talk about what happened after making this discovery. How did Traffickinghub come about? How did the creation of the Justice Defence Fund come about? And what has progress looked like since?
Yes, so, things really took off in 2020. And, with the petition and op-ed, hundreds of media articles started to be written about this. And, the pressure was on. We had journalists coming forward and attorneys coming forward, and most importantly, courageous victims and survivors who were coming forward. And I just want to recognize that we have a survivor here with us. We are so privileged and honored tonight to actually be sitting in the presence of a courageous survivor, Kate, and I'm just very moved that she is able to be here with us because, she is the reason, right? And she and her and the other survivors, are not just fighting for justice for themselves, but one of the most important things that they always say is, like, they do not want this to happen to anybody else. And they want to, pursue justice to the full extent of the law to make sure, yes, that justice is necessary for their own healing, but to make sure that we can prevent this in the future. So I just wanted to recognize that. Thank you, Kate, for being here this evening. But yeah, victims and survivors were coming forward and courageously sharing their stories. And then, one of the critical things that happened in the midst of all this, as we were going and trying to reach out to the credit card companies, we were having conversations with the VPs of MasterCard and Visa and sharing the evidence and sharing all of the information, but we were met with a lot of resistance. And one of the things that we thought about was, if there was any journalist in the world that could tell this story with impact and compassion and really do dignity to the stories of survivors, it would be Nick Kristof from the New York Times. He's a 2-time Pulitzer Prize winning journalist from the New York Times, and he had written on the issue of trafficking before and has been very effective in that. And he actually took notice of what was happening. There was viral videos happening, viral victim stories that were going out, all the media. And he began a 6-month investigation. And I was able to connect him with many of the survivors that were coming forward to tell their stories, including Serena, who I told you about. He actually ended up releasing a powerful article called The Children of Pornhub that exposed all of these details that we're discussing, plus more. I mean, obviously, they did their own research, and it was just, I couldn't believe the impact that this one article had. It sent shockwaves around the world. There was thousands of follow-on articles after this. Justin Trudeau, was making comments in the news, responding to the article, because Pornhub was based in Canada. Like, their headquarters was in Canada. They're a multinational corporation, but they had their headquarters there, and the Canadian Parliament was up in arms and demanding a criminal investigation. And one of the strategic things that he did in his article was he called out the credit card companies. He said, I don't know why Visa and MasterCard would still be doing business with Pornhub with all that we know. And that really put the pressure on Pornhub. And they were getting calls from journalists asking that very question, the Visa executives. And within days of that article coming out, Visa and MasterCard announced that they were cutting ties with Pornhub, leaving them only with cryptocurrency as a payment option. And in a panic, because this actually was the worst thing that could ever happen to Pornhub, they did the unthinkable, according to their business model that I described, right? Because taking content off the site is the worst thing you can do for a PornTube site. But they made the decision to, in order to try to woo back the credit card companies, to delete and remove and take down all of their unverified content. That equaled 80% of the entire website. They deleted millions of videos overnight, over 10 million videos and over 30 million images, in what the Financial Times called probably the biggest takedown of content in internet history. And that's what happened. But unfortunately, I found out months later from an insider from the company that a few weeks after all of that happened, the credit card companies quietly snuck back to Pornhub's advertising arm called Traffic Junkie, which is how they were making most of their money, and business kind of was going on as usual. And it was another 2-year battle to finally get the credit card companies to cut all ties with Pornhub. And so, that happened. But the CEO and the COO were forced to resign. The secret majority shareholder was exposed. Tortoise Media, Financial Times first reported his name, and then Tortoise Media did an investigation called Hunt for the Porn King, and he was found here in London. And they're actually located Burned, Burgmere. And today, he is personally being sued by dozens of victims, along with the other owners of the company. And they were criminally charged by the US federal government for intentionally profiting from sex trafficking. They admitted to this. Unfortunately, they were given a deal, a deferred prosecution agreement, to avoid trial, where they actually had to pay $1.8 million to a specific set of victims and have a babysitter, like a government monitor, over their site for 3 years. But we're still, there are still states that are looking into pursuing criminal prosecution. There's still criminal prosecution that can happen on behalf of so many of the other victims around the world. And then the company was sold as a distressed asset. So, and today, they have actually had to take down 91% of the entire website is gone. So they went from 56 million pieces of content in 2020 to 5.2 million pieces of content today. And the job's not done because that is still unverified content that is on the site. There's still a lot of unverified content. So we're still working on it.
Before I hand over to the floor, if you guys have any questions, I'll take one more for myself. Is there any way that these sites, not Pornhub, other sites, can exist in an ethical sense, in an ethical way? Is there a way of producing porn ethically?
So it all comes back to, for me, I think this is such an important question, because the question becomes, yes, we can hold a company accountable, we can hold a website accountable, and we have to do that, right? Because justice has to be served in order to deter future abusers. That is so important. This is a risk-benefit calculation for these executives and these corporations. And as long as the risk is low and the benefit is high, they will continue to do what they do. So that is why, we are trying to obtain justice to the full extent of the law for this particular company. But then the question becomes, well, there's other tube sites, right? There's other free porn tube sites that don't verify age and consent. And so how do we actually solve the problem going forward? And that goes back to the origination of the problem. And I think the solution, and I'd love to hear your ideas too, because I start my book by saying, I have some answers, but I'm here to learn from you too. This is a group effort. This has always been a group effort. But the solution that I envision is one where we demand and we require these sites to have robust and reliable age and consent verification for every single person in every single video that is uploaded to a user-generated porn site. Now, obviously, it won't be perfect, but it will do so much to limit the amount of content that gets uploaded because it has to be prevented before upload. It's not enough to say, we'll make sure we take it down within 24 hours of a notification. Because on a site that has 170 million visits per day, an hour is too long. A minute on that site is too long. And victims say that when their videos get uploaded, it is the immortalization of their trauma in that moment, because this lives online forever. And they are haunted by the reality that the worst moment of their life will live on in perpetuity long after they're dead for profit and for pleasure, that people will be experiencing their trauma and possessing their trauma and being able to continually upload it forever. And that is why the solution goes back to prevention. And how do we implement that policy? Because doesn't that seem like a huge task to get all of these free user-generated porn sites to verify age and consent? And that is why I think that governments have to implement this policy, but probably more important than governments implementing the policy is financial institutions. Because these corporations are highly motivated by credit card company demands, as we know. So if Visa says, we don't do business with user-generated porn sites that don't verify the age and consent of every individual in every video, these sites will quickly comply because they don't want to lose the ability to have financial transactions. And so to me, I think that ultimately the solution lies within the financial institution. Just like they have anti-money laundering policy, they have anti-online sexual exploitation policy that demands age and consent verification for every person in every video. That's where I think the solution is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions from the floor? Sure.
Hi. Oh, hello. This is working. Yes. Hi. Laila, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your account. And I read your book, and it was a really, really brilliant account of the process that you took to take down Pornhub. My question is, why do you think you were the person to do this? And had there been other people before you who had noticed this, and had they tried to do what you have done successfully?
I've actually, wondered that as well, because this was hidden in plain sight, right, since 2007. I wasn't the first person to know that there was no age and consent verification to upload to Pornhub. Millions of people were uploading every year, right? It's just that they hadn't sounded the alarm on the problem, that this was, an injustice happening. Just sometimes I think of this phrase that it was an idea whose time had come. Like, it was time for there to be accountability. And, I happened, in the course of preparing probably my whole life, like looking back upon, the trajectory of my life, like I felt like, I was preparing for something I had no idea was gonna happen, right? It happened organically, it wasn't planned. But at the same time, I felt like all the work before that was in preparation to be able to then do, what has happened since. But certainly was not a lone effort. And certainly there was people who were sounding an alarm about the business model of free user-generated porn for a long time. And later, I found out, after I had started Traffickinghub, I started to be contacted by people in the porn industry who said, we've been saying this forever, but nobody's listening Because you know what? Their stolen content, like their pirated content, their copyrighted content, like the porn tube sites were built on exploiting their content as well. So they hated Pornhub. They hated the tube sites. And they had been making noise, I guess, within their own sphere, right? That this was like destroying their own businesses because their stuff was just being hijacked and distributed for free. But it just hadn't gotten traction, I guess. And I can't explain why at that particular moment that this really just got legs, but it did. And I think, one part of it was the fact that, it was COVID. Like everybody was at home, everybody was online, and I think people had time to actually care about this. So in some ways I thought, when this first began and then COVID started, I go, oh no, this is like the worst timing for this, but actually ended up, I think, being really helpful in helping things go viral at that moment.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? With the mask.
Thank you so much for coming and for sharing your story and the work that you've done to help so many innocent people. I'm curious if you're concerned about the growing popularity of cryptocurrency and that it could erode the power that credit card companies have to influence sites like this.
Yes, that's a kind of a hiccup in the strategy, I guess, is that able to also be used to leverage, these sites to change their policies. At the moment, we know that it's emerging in popularity, but most people are still not utilizing it to transact online. So that's why I see as a backup to the power of the financial institutions, figuring out, like, is there a way for crypto to also have influence in the same way? I don't know. Like, I would love to explore that with people who are experts in cryptocurrency. Like, is there a way to do that? But also having governments as a backup, because we need, it to be formalized and institutionalized within government that these are requirements as well as the financial institutions. But it's a really good concern. It's something I think about, and I don't know yet. Like, how are we going to solve for that? It's a great question.
At the front here.
Thank you so much for coming and speaking. Your whole mission is very, very motivating and inspiring. So you've spoken a lot about the role of credit card companies and financial institutions in perpetuating these injustices and these issues. But I was thinking that Pornhub and other porn sites also need the viewers in order to flourish, and that's really what also keeps the cycle going. So I was wondering if what you think maybe certain solutions would be to discourage viewers from flocking to these sites, and probably your story and publishing your book and everything also has a part to play in that. But I was wondering if you had any solutions on the more consumer side as well.
That is a great point, because at the end of the day, they don't make any money if they don't have any views and clicks. And there's so much power that the consumer has in changing all of this. It's a lot harder, right? Because there's millions of people who are, need to be exposed. And as much as, we've had thousands of media articles written, and I've written a book, and we've done all this, and still, I just did Theo Vaughn's podcast. He's a popular podcaster in the United States. And I was just really encouraged because he has a mostly like male, young audience. And the amount of people who said that they had just heard the story for the first time, especially young men, and they said, like, I'm done. Like, I am not going to go to Pornhub anymore. I had no idea. And it actually, they said, instantly is turning them off from participating in the free user-generated porn tube site model. And so that was, very encouraging. And so maybe it's a matter of saturation, because I think still at this point, probably 99.9% of everybody in the world has no idea that this ever happened, that this is ever a problem. And so I think the louder we can be and the more we can share, we can start to impact the consumer side of it. Hopefully, would be, but it's really important.
At the front.
Laila, do you think it's important, following on from that, that users of porn are aware of the harms to them and not just to the awful victims who have been used without their consent?
Oh, yes. Yes, and there's those who have, like you both, have dedicated your life to sharing the harms that can be done, especially, as we're having a moment, I think, in our world where there's a lot of traction on protecting kids from being able to witness this content. And like I often say, it's not that they're just witnessing what's hardcore and violent as things have escalated online on the tube sites, because part of the business model, right, is like what gets more views and clicks, and the algorithm will serve up to the user what is the thing that will grab the attention the most, what will cause them to stay, what will cause them to click. And it's more and more extreme content that does that. That's what I hear also, like, from porn producers themselves, is that there's this kind of need for escalation because and also, you all would know this better than anyone else and be able to explain it, but just to the dopamine hit that you can get, you need novelty, you need something different. You don't necessarily just need something more. And so anyway, that's a part of the business model, right, of generating the views and the clicks. And it's really scary to think that a generation of children's sexuality would be shaped by an algorithm designed by executives in a 6th-floor Montreal tower who are dedicated to profit over anything else, and that their sexuality could really be hijacked from such a young age, and that it's not only just hardcore violent legal pornography that's being distributed, but actual crime, like actual sexual crime. I would never wish on my worst enemy the things that I've seen on Pornhub, and yet children as young as 8 years old, like I just was told yesterday that the Children's Commissioner here, or Ofcom, had found out that over 90% of 12-year-olds have smartphones, right? And so, like, in 2 clicks, they have access to this whole world of online free user-generated porn. And for them to have witnessed the things that I've seen, like, that is sexual abuse of children, to have to witness that, and then it will impact them for life. And so I'm really grateful that it feels like there's a movement to implement laws. 17 states in the US have adopted age verification laws for users of these sites. And Pornhub right now actually sued the state of Texas for implementing age verification. And they shut themselves down in 16 states because they're protesting age verification for users because it costs them money to hire a third party to age verify. And they're taking it to the Supreme Court. So we'll see by the summer what happens with that. But it's happening here in the UK, in France, in Germany, in Canada. There's laws being implemented to protect kids.
I just want to follow on from that. We've seen recently, especially in the UK, the use of AI to essentially morph pictures of children onto bodies of other people completely illegally, and then uploaded onto sites like this. There isn't regulation around this currently. What is the future of that, and where do people holding these people accountable come into place there?
Yeah, I'm seeing that there's laws being introduced, at least in the US, and others that are criminalizing AI-produced non-consensual content, deep fakes, and all of that, which is really important. I think that's starting to get more attention and more headlines. I think that with the user-generated porn distribution model, I still think that age and consent verification could solve a lot of that problem. Because if you had to show an ID, if you had to have consent, like it would also inhibit the distribution of the AI-generated content as well. So I think that could help in that regard as well. But it's a concern. Yeah.
I think we can have a couple more from the floor, just over here.
This is more of a thought that I want to hear your take on rather than a question. When you were talking about how there are very clear, or there are videos where the abuse is very clear and the tags on them and the names and the way they're, archived on the website is very clear what's going on. And the sort of titles that you gave are also things that are on the middle line of what could be legal or what could be legal, and you see a lot of not user-generated content but professional content produced that plays on these tropes because there's so much obsession with youngness and that and I'm wondering what your take is on also addressing feeding into those things by not only user-generated content, which could actually be legal, but then technically legal content that very much feeds into those tropes.
Yeah, I mean, that was, I think, part of the reason why some of this remained hidden in plain sight was because there was some assumption that maybe they looked like they were, because you can't tell the difference sometimes, like the teen genre, and that was one of the most popular categories on Pornhub, and we found out from Legal Discovery recently, just in December, that they were tracking to the dollar every month how much they were making on those tags, like very, very young and young teen, and all these different variations of tags and titles that would indicate that this is an underage teen. And it's very, very popular. And people are assuming because they're allowed to, it didn't used to be allowed in the United States. There was a court case in the 90s that made it legal to show a depiction of a child, even if, that as long as they were over 18, that they could be depicted as a child and it would be legal as long as they weren't actually a child. So like you have braces and flat chest and no makeup and pigtails and all of this. And people are feeding on that fantasy. The problem, like on the porn tube sites, is it was mixed in with like actual underage teens and tweens that were on the site, so they wouldn't know the difference. But yeah, I think that it is certainly problematic. And certain countries, they have criminalized the depiction. Like in Canada, for example, it is illegal to even share the depiction of a child, even if they're over 18. If they appear to be a child, it's actually against the law to be distributing and producing that kind of content. So maybe there is something there for, what other countries are doing in criminalizing even the depictions of, rape or child abuse.
Time for one more, just at the front here.
Thank you so much for everything you said today. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on what we can be doing as students to actually make a difference, whether that's around educating ourselves. I know Kate is sharing her story at an event next Friday, I think.
Yes, please, everybody attend Kate's talk next Friday. Yeah, at what time is she going to do that?
It's late, isn't it? Past my bedtime.
I think 7:30 at the old Div School.
Yes, advertise that all around. Tell everybody to show up, yeah.
Yeah, so going on to that, or actually things we can start doing with, I don't know, our careers, our degrees, whatever it might be, just so there's a bit of hope of what change can actually look like.
Yeah, I mean, just being able to talk about this, I think a lot of people are afraid to talk about porn. Like they're just embarrassed, or if they're users themselves, they feel hypocritical. Like, I can't talk about it because I'm a user myself, Or people feel silenced. A lot of times you get attacked. One of the hardest things was just to, be attacked as, oh, you're just a, you're just a prude and you're, this and that, and kind of name calling and whatnot of when you speak out on this subject matter. Even if you're going after like the criminal content, you still have that happen. But to just be bold and courageous and to talk about it and to, do whatever you can in your sphere. Like one of the things that I have been so encouraged by over the last 5 years is the way that like it doesn't take an executive professional in their fancy office to enact change. Like just for me, like a mother, right? I was just at home with my kids, and I have had like training, right? And I've had my experience over the years, but just a regular person. And the way that people came together in all their spheres of influence. So like attorneys, so if your passion was to be an attorney, they're using their skills in this regard. The journalists have played such an important role. Lawmakers, law enforcement, artists. Like we've had just some of the most impactful murals and artwork that has been used, and people have created artwork for Traffickinghub that has helped these posts go viral. Getting hundreds of millions of views and getting victims and whistleblowers to see those and then come forward, and now they're actually pursuing justice in court because of a post that was like a piece of art that was then distributed. So I would just encourage you to follow your passion and what you feel like where you can make the biggest contribution, and then use that, because we need everything. Like, we don't just need NGOs. Like, we don't just need, we need everybody to take their place. It's like a team, right? A baseball team. You take your place and you play your part, and that's when we can take on abusers this big. And that's what I've been so encouraged by with what's happened in the last 5 years with Traffickinghub and holding Pornhub accountable, is seeing like that actually happen.
Laila, on that note, I think we're all very thankful that you've come today and for your words. I'd be grateful if we could put our hands together to say thank you. Thank you.